Hey there. Sit tight and get ready to be amazed, because I'm about to tell you a story that will make any aviation fan's hair stand on end. We're talking about an airplane that was so far ahead of its time, the Allies simply had no idea what to do with it. I promise you won't be able to look away. This isn't just a story about a piece of metal with wings. This is a detective story, a drama, a tale of genius and madness, all mixed together with jet thrust. By the way, if you're into this kind of content, deep dives, historical investigations, and just high-quality stuff, hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, click it because it only gets more interesting from here. And yeah, drop a comment or two. Have you ever heard of this bird? Today, we're talking about the fighter that was the invincible airplane of World War II. You know that old saying, fast feet aren't afraid of a fight? As a kid, I thought it was about running away from bullies in the schoolyard. But the older I get, the more I realize this phrase applies to everything. Even aviation, especially aviation. Let's just use our imagination for a second and transport ourselves back to the first half of the 40s. Guns are roaring, the sky is filled with smoke, and in all that chaos, thousands of planes are swirling around. But here's the interesting part. All their weapons were either cannons or unguided rockets. No heat-seeking, radar-guided air-to-air missiles. To shoot down an enemy, you had to fly right up to them, get them in your sights, and keep that clunky crosshair on them. Now imagine your target is screaming along at nearly 700 kilometers per hour. Just getting your sights on them in that insane wind is a challenge for actual flying gods. Rockets, they were slow, dumb, and clunky, totally useless against a fast-moving target. The German engineers looked at all this and rubbed their greedy little hands together. They had a genius realization. If we build a plane so fast that no one can catch it, it doesn't even need weapons. Let the enemy just watch it fly away, chewing on their knuckles. And that's how the concept of invincibility through speed was born. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand the context. The year is 1941. And if you think the king of the sky was some Spitfire, Mustang, or Messerschmitt Bf 109, you are deeply mistaken. Back then, a completely different bird was on the throne. And it wasn't even really a fighter in the classic sense. I'm talking about the de Havilland Mosquito. This machine is a legend in its own right. Wooden, light, and unbelievably fast. It appeared like a thunderclap out of a clear blue sky. You see, while everyone else was building planes out of aluminum and steel, the British said, "Why don't we just glue one together out of plywood?" And it worked. It was light as a feather and flew faster than anything else. The Mosquito was the Swiss Army knife of World War II. Need a light bomber? No problem. A photo reconnaissance plane? Easy. A heavy fighter? Sure. A night interceptor? You got it. Did you know there were even naval versions? Well, almost. This machine did everything. But the scariest part for the German high command wasn't just how it flew, but how it was made. The all-wood construction meant they could churn out these planes by the dozens every month. Not in some secret aviation factory, but in, say, a piano factory or a furniture workshop. The Germans had nightmares picturing Britain converting its furniture factories to build fighters. It gave them a serious twitch. And, of course, the German command completely freaked out. They needed a symmetrical, asymmetrical threat. They didn't just want to catch the Mosquito. They wanted to outrun it so badly it wouldn't even know what happened. At the end of 1940, the Reich Aviation Ministry issues a requirement for a jet-powered reconnaissance aircraft. The numbers were absolutely insane for the time. A speed of over 650 kilometers per hour. The Mosquito, in its best versions, was just hitting that ceiling, and for 1941, that was the absolute record. The stratosphere. And the range. The plane had to be able to fly all the way to the British naval base at Scapa Flow. For those who don't know, this base was the main lair of the British fleet, the Grand Fleet. It's located about 30 kilometers north of Scotland. Basically, practically beyond the Arctic Circle in the cold and fog. Do the math. The plane needed to fly 1,000 kilometers there, complete its mission, and fly 1,000 kilometers back. That's 2,000 kilometers total. And this isn't on a propeller plane with a fuel-sipping engine, but on jet power, which was still in its infancy. Those early engines guzzled fuel like there was no tomorrow, hundreds of liters per hour. So the question was, who would dare take on this crazy challenge? Most companies said, "Guys, you're insane. This is impossible." Only one company raised its hand and said, "Is that all you've got?" That company was Arado. The design team was led by Walter Bloom. Interesting guy. Some of you might know him as a World War I flying ace. So this guy fought on biplanes, watched aviation take its first steps, and now he's designing a machine for the future. It's like your grandpa, who used to hitch horses to carriages, suddenly starting to design a Tesla. They presented a project with the innocent name E370. At first glance, it looked like a pretty normal plane for its time, nothing supernatural. A high-wing design, 2 engines under the wings. But the main feature was inside. Well, actually outside. 2 Jumo 004 jet engines. These were the world's first mass-produced jet engines, and they came with more problems than the average person deals with in a lifetime. The plane had very smooth, streamlined shapes. Engineers back then already knew the secret of aerodynamics. The fewer things sticking out, the faster you go. The cockpit was designed as a glass nose like on future attack aircraft or strategic bombers. This gave an amazing view and almost perfect aerodynamics. The designers were counting on it flying at such high speeds that it simply wouldn't need machine guns or cannons. Why bother? If you're faster than everyone else, you just outrun any danger. By early 1941, the company presented a prototype. The numbers it showed shocked the military. Maximum speed, 770 kilometers per hour. For comparison, the best piston engine fighters of the time struggled to reach 600 or 620. Service ceiling, over 12,000 meters. Allied high-altitude bombers flew at 8 or 9,000. So our hero was a full 3 kilometers higher. From that height, you could spit on the enemy's heads and photograph them like ants. Combat radius, almost 2,000 kilometers. To achieve this range, the designers had to go to extreme measures. Almost the entire fuselage was packed with fuel tanks. Imagine, the plane weighs 8 tons, and 3 tons of that is pure fuel. It's like buying a car where 2/3 of the weight is the gas tank. Insanity, but it worked. The fuel system was so huge that even using every pump available at the time, refueling took about half an hour. Nowadays, we fill up our tanks in 5 minutes. Back then, pilots sat and waited for those tons to flow into the plane. And where were the cameras? The reconnaissance cameras were crammed into the back of the fuselage. They took up about 20% of the entire interior volume. And these weren't just point-and-shoot cameras for family photos. These were complex devices with powerful optics. Photographing the ground from 12 kilometers up is seriously difficult. You have to compensate for vibration, speed, and cloud cover. It was advanced mathematics. And here's another detail that seems wild to us now. This prototype didn't have normal wheels. Seriously. To save weight, the engineers thought, why carry landing gear through the air? It's dead weight. Let's take off from a special trolley and land on skis. And they did it. The plane was placed on a 3-wheeled trolley, accelerated, took off. The trolley was jettisoned and fell to earth. They collect it later and reuse it. And this beauty landed on retractable skis. Can you imagine the pilot's feeling? You're flying a jet, the fastest plane in the world, and you're landing like you're sledding down a hill. They fixed this later and put in normal human landing gear, but the first versions were exactly like that. Then comes an important date, October 24th, 1941. The E370 is approved for production. The Reich Aviation Ministry immediately orders 50 planes from Arado. It seemed like the path to glory was wide open. But then something happened that could have buried the project forever. Ernst Udet shot himself. This name might not mean much to the average person today, but for the Luftwaffe, this was a disaster. Udet, Inspector General of the Luftwaffe, legendary pilot, one of the founding fathers of German aviation. He was a progressive guy, passionate about new technologies, jet engines. He supported the E370 with both hands. His death, officially suicide, though rumors of foul play persist, was a massive blow, and his replacement was Erhard Milch. If Udet was an innovator and adventurer, Milch was a hard-nosed manager, a conservative, a bureaucrat, a man who only believed in proven, reliable solutions. He came in and started cracking down. Most of the funding for advanced projects was frozen or cut. Money went to standard, dependable planes that could be produced by the millions. But for the E-370, the stars aligned. Milch, being a pragmatist, decided to visit the tests himself about a month after taking office. He saw this incredibly fast machine, the numbers it was putting up, and he was impressed. Not only was funding not stopped, it was even increased the following year. But the problems were just beginning. Remember the Jumo 004 engines? Well, Arado couldn't get them. Imagine, you have the blueprints, you have the airframes, you have a ready factory, but you lack the plane's heart. Messerschmitt, working on the Me-262, the world's first jet fighter, got the engines 8 months earlier. Arado sat and waited its turn until February of 1943. All of 1942 and early 43, the company had only one flying prototype. One. They used it to test basic capabilities. But Arado didn't just sit around. Obsessively, they kept building airframes. And as soon as the engines finally arrived, magic happened. The first flight of a pre-production plane took place on June 15, 1943. And the very next day, a second one was ready. They were cranking out machines at a rate of 1 per week. Production speed you had to respect. But then came the payback for all that waiting. The Jumo 004 engines turned out to be so temperamental, any modern diva would be jealous. They needed a complete overhaul every 25 flight hours. That's about 8 to 10 combat missions. A full inspection was needed practically every time the plane returned to base. The engines coughed, died, overheated, and sometimes exploded right in the air. Plus, junkers didn't give Arado the best examples. Some of them would only start once in their entire life. It's like buying a new car that starts only every other time. So, full-scale testing had to be delayed all the way until July of 1943. But, the Germans were stubborn. By September of that year, 4 pre-production planes were already in the air. The program was successful. It seemed like everything was finally on track. And then, as in any good thriller, disaster strikes. On October 2, 1943, the second pre-production prototype crashes. An engine fails. Then part of the electronics fail. The pilot, Captain Sell, is killed. The plane crashes upside down, but according to eyewitnesses, it kind of bounced off the ground. A horrible death. But war doesn't allow for pauses. Testing continued. And then, outside the testing program, a historic event occurs. The 7th plane, AR-234V7, completes the first reconnaissance mission in human history by a jet aircraft. Imagine this. Summer of 1944, Normandy. The Allies are preparing to land, though the invasion is already in full swing. The Germans need information, and this silent, well, relatively silent, jet scout screams over the beaches at an altitude unreachable by anti-aircraft fire. 2 cameras in the back of the fuselage click every 11 seconds. Before this, standard reconnaissance planes like the Focke-Wulf 189 took photos every 30 seconds. The difference is colossal. In an hour and a half, this one plane covered the entire invasion area, 400 square kilometers of territory. For that time, it was unbelievable. But, as was often the case with the Germans, a brilliant technical idea was killed by bureaucracy and indecision. Only about 10 reconnaissance versions were ever built. Its real fame came in another role. When the massive bombing of Germany began, the Luftwaffe needed a fast bomber. And they remembered the Arado. The AR-234B2 version became truly mass-produced. By the end of 44, 200 of these bombers had been delivered to the Luftwaffe. What could it do? At lightning speed, imagine 700+ kilometers per hour, it could deliver 1.5 tons of bombs over huge distances. No Allied fighter could intercept it. They destroyed transport hubs, bridges, supply depots. They'd appear from nowhere, drop death, and vanish back into nowhere. But the Germans, as we know, love to complicate things. So 3 more versions were developed: C, D, and Nachtigall. The AR-234C was born from the shortage of Jumo 004 engines. By the end of the war, all those engines were going to the Me-262 as the priority fighter. Arado had to improvise. They installed 4 BMW 003 engines. Yes, each one was weaker, but 4 together gave more thrust than 2 Jumos. The plane got heavier but also more powerful. Version D was an attempt to jump even higher. They wanted to put his 011A engines on it, with a thrust of 1,300 kilograms of force. For comparison, the Jumo 004 gave 900. The BMW 003 gave 800. But these new engines turned out to be so temperamental and unrefined that mass production was impossible. And finally, the Nachtigall Nightingale version. This was an attempt to turn the recon plane into a night fighter. They added a couple of cannons, a radar, and got a complete failure. The plane was too fast for nimble night fighting, and the radar worked terribly. Apart from 2 experimental planes, nothing came of it. But the real fame and tragedy of this plane is tied to one bridge, the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. For those unfamiliar, let's break this down. The Rhine is Germany's main water artery. Building a crossing over a river more than 300 meters wide is a nightmare. It takes days and weeks of precious time, thousands of tons of engineering equipment. So when the Americans captured the Ludendorff Bridge almost completely intact on March 7, 1945, it was a gift from heaven. The bridge was needed to rush tanks, artillery, and infantry straight into the heart of Germany. The Germans, of course, knew this was a catastrophe, and Hitler ordered, the bridge must be destroyed at all costs. But the Allies weren't stupid either. They knew the Germans would try to bomb it. They concentrated more anti-aircraft artillery around that bridge than the world had ever seen before or since. Hundreds of guns. Flak guns everywhere. On the hills, on the banks, on rooftops. Any plane approaching the bridge entered a zone of absolute hell. And this is where the Germans played their game. They knew the Allies didn't know about the AR-234. Or at least, they underestimated its capabilities. The daily attacks began. AR-234s would appear at high speed, drop their bombs, and disappear. Allied pilots could only watch them go. Some bombs fell right under the bridge, slightly damaging its foundations. But the bridge held. American gunners shot at anything that moved. Ammunition expenditure was monstrous. As one officer later wrote, every approaching German plane cost the American taxpayer $1 million worth of anti-aircraft shells. On March 10th, the bridge was still standing. The Germans threw everything at it, old Junkers and new jets. The AR-234s flew mission after mission. Then, on March 17th, the inexplicable happened. The Ludendorff Bridge collapsed on its own. It just fell into the river, killing 28 American soldiers who were on it at the time. There's still debate. Did the German bombs finally do their job? Or did the structure just give out from the stress and vibrations of constant nearby explosions? The fact remains. The bridge fell. Unfortunately for the Third Reich, by then, the Americans had already built pontoon bridges upstream and downstream. The collapse couldn't stop their advance. Germany was crumbling, and the AR-234 couldn't change history anymore. But let's get back to the main question. Was it really invincible? The Allies certainly tried to shoot it down. But as history shows, it was incredibly difficult. First, the plane was top secret. Very few people even saw one. Second, it was used so rarely that Allied pilots never developed tactics against it. Third, the speed. Allied piston fighters maxed out at around 650 in level flight and 725 in a dive. The AR-234 did 750 in level flight and 850 in a dive. The airframe could even handle loads up to 870 kilometers per hour, though they never officially pushed it that far. There's a documented case in '45 where a group of American P-47 Thunderbolts encountered 3 AR-234s. They met almost at 90-degree angles, crossing paths. The German scouts just turned slightly, went into a shallow dive, and vanished over the horizon in seconds. The Americans were left with nothing. This is especially notable because the P-47 was one of the fastest Allied planes, second only to the jet-powered Gloucester Meteor. The Allies' conclusion was grim. If an AR-234 wanted to run, nobody could stop it. But, as they say, every rule has an exception. The Arado had an Achilles heel, maneuverability. If you forced it to maneuver, it lost speed instantly. In a turning fight, this jet racer turned into a clumsy, heavy beast. And this was the cause of the only confirmed shootdown of a reconnaissance version. It happened during one of the bombing runs on the Ludendorff Bridge. A group of AR-234s had dropped their bombs and were egressing the target. But waiting for them on exit were P-51 Mustangs. The German pilots knew the mantra: dive, accelerate, and run. But at 200 meters altitude, there's nowhere to dive. The ground is too close. Machine gun fire ripped through the air nearby. The Germans had to maneuver to evade. Speed dropped, and then an Allied ace, Don Bryan, made his move. He managed to position his Mustang above a bomber and let loose a long burst from his 6 machine guns. The German pilot didn't stand a chance. The plane slammed into the ground. This was the only confirmed combat loss of an AR-234 in its entire short history. After the war, the victors divided the spoils. 9 planes went to England. 2 were captured by Soviet forces. Rumor has it our engineers thought about building copies but then gave up, too complex and expensive for the post-war devastation. The rest, as usual, went to the Americans. Today, the only surviving AR-234 can be seen at the National Air and Space Museum in Virginia. If you're ever in the States, go see this marvel of engineering. What do the pilots who actually flew it say? Every single one calls it a masterpiece. It handled beautifully in the air, had pleasant controls, and the view from the glass cockpit was amazing. The only problem, takeoff and landing. The plane needed an insanely long runway. The early jets accelerated slowly, and the brakes were weak. Taking off from a short field was nearly impossible, and landing was a lottery. But despite these flaws, the AR-234 remains one of the greatest creations of German aviation genius. It was a plane that could do almost everything, but it arrived too late and in too few numbers to change the course of history. Imagine if in 1942, the Luftwaffe had 100 of these. If they could have photographed every Allied move with impunity and bombed their rear areas at an untouchable speed. Maybe history would have been different. But history has no room for what-ifs. We can only admire the audacity of the engineering and understand one simple truth. Speed is life, not just in aviation. Friends, if you've read this far, you are a true history fan, and your opinion matters to me. Drop a comment. Had you heard of this plane before? And in your opinion, what was the coolest plane of World War II? And yeah, don't be like Milch, don't put off subscribing. Subscribe to the channel, hit like, ring the bell so you don't miss new episodes about forgotten war heroes. In the next episode, we'll talk about the plane that bombed New York. Well, tried to bomb it. This is going to be intense. Stay tuned.